Hi, this is a video for English 210. I think this is the fourth video. The theme of this video is follow up. What I wanted to do today was look at what we're doing next week. How does it relate to last week? How does it relate to the weeks to come? So this week we are working in the folder marked 4-6. So we come into weeks 330 and 4-6. This is where you guys have been working last week, working on what color has to say about poetry and also indicating what poem you're presenting or representing. This week we're doing two things. One of those things, you're posting your notes on your poem of choice using that who, what, where, when, what, how, and why piece that I referred to. I'll make some other suggestions too. You're also looking through available library resources. So the poem piece is in place of the presentation you're going to do. You'll be kind of gathering some notes so that we can give you feedback, and I'm going to invite everybody to give feedback to as many people as they can. What do you notice? What do you see? What do you hear? I'll give feedback to everybody. Don't wait for me. Jump in. One of the ways to start to give feedback is to look back at the choice of poems. Some of you have chosen the same poets and even the same poems. So one of the things you want to do is follow up on from last week in the 30th, the week of the 30th, follow up on what some of you have said you would like to do. I have responded to, I think, everybody, and some of you have started to make notes toward each other. So you don't have to wait for people to post their texts this week. They're what they're working on. Look back at what was suggested last week, and in many cases I've left questions there for you and you've left me hanging, right? I've asked you a question and I haven't heard back. Maybe it's even been a week. So one of the ways you could start to work on posting your notes of the poem for this week is go back to what was last week and see what I or others may have said to you. The other thing we're working on this week is to see what's available in the library. So I want to go into both of these. Folders. So I'm going to open up this week, and I can see somebody's been in the poetry notes since I was last there. I know when it's bolded like this that there's something new. Here's the library. Nobody's been in there since I worked in there. So I'll open up your poetry notes. And here I'm asking you to gather notes from your reading of the poem that you've chosen. Think about who, where, and when. You know, who is the writer, certainly, but who's speaking? Remember, when we had some comments last week, I think, around some notes that Jenna had made about whether there's a difference between the speaker of the poem as the writer, the author, and the speaker of the poem as some kind of character who's talking to us. And it's part of our job as readers to figure out who is that? Why are they speaking? And so the who, where, and when questions are not simply about the author, but are also about what can I tell about the speaker just from the words on the page. And in some cases we have commentary that would help us to think about that. So we can also think about the where and the when of the author, like what's their historical situation. I've written a note to Corey about this. If you look back last week at the poem that Corey picked out, I posted him a note about that, so you could check that out if you wanted to see what I'm talking about. So the idea this week is you're posting notes. The ultimate idea is an essay in place of a presentation. This was going to be a 5-page essay. I've proposed a 3-page essay instead. Maybe what you post this week is your essay. If I can grade it, I will. Maybe what you post this week is just notes as you're thinking your way toward an essay, and you want to get some feedback from the rest of us so that you can gather it to be an essay for the end of next week, the 19th. So maybe you're trying to be done by the 12th. Maybe you know that you're going to get some feedback and then try to be done for the 19th. Right? I see here that I wrote a note that if you're going to go for an A or a B in the course, if you're not willing to just settle for just passing, right? But if you want to go for the A or the B, be sure to give some feedback to 2 or 3 other students. You might give them suggestions, ask questions, point to sources, etc. And I'm going to try to model some of this as we go. So I'll see. So Emily has posted here, and so I wanted to see also what's new. And I see that Krista has posted as well. So I want to show you what Emily posted in my response to it to give you a sense of what I'm talking about. So Emily posted a PDF She wants to look at the poem Labyrinth by Kenyatta Rogers. This is a new poem to me, not one that I know. She's interested in drawing on colors, ideas about poetry and defining poetry. In fact, this whole question of defining poetry has become an issue. If you look at what Jamie posted in the color poetry discussion last week, she posted it a little bit late, but it's a very good kind of starting point if you want to think about this question of what does it mean to define poetry. And it looks like she also wants to get an overview of the poem. She has some notes thinking about her take, some inspiration. It looks like she's looked into the poet and the poet's wife. And do we know it's a wife and not a partner? Kenyatta is an interesting name. I don't know anything about this author. Is a he? Is that right? Okay. Structure. Looks like it's going to be some notes about structuring the poem. Now, it would be helpful to have the poem right in front of me here. I don't see it. It would be helpful for me to see it. So when you're giving feedback to somebody, you might also go back into the original section to see, do we have the poem? So how do I get back? I think I want to just close this. Good. And so I wrote some notes. These are good notes. Would you post the actual poem? Check out my post marked reading in all directions. Oh, spoiler alert. Here it comes. And so Emily posted a link to the poem. You'll notice the link doesn't open. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy it, and I will open a new section here. So in poets.org, no thank you, poets.org, find and share the perfect poems. Here's Kenyatta Rogers, and maybe, I don't know if that helps me to understand where the writer's coming from. And we have the text here. Interesting with these little lines and the way, and the structure is definitely interesting. They look like little haiku. Notice that sentences spill over these lines. These lines are interesting, and I think we probably have, it looks like we may have an audio of the poem that one could listen to. Looks like we could find out more about the author. Close that out. So good. So Emily provided the poem a couple of days ago, and it might be useful for those of us who want to respond to check that out. So I wrote a piece in response. I don't want to come to this. And I see Krista has posted some notes, and I'll save looking at those for later. And so I wanted to offer this to you. Is this a poem? So if you're not sure what to write about, I would say that I didn't write this as a poem, but I've certainly lineated it as a poem. So one of the things you could think about, thinking about Jamie's question about the difficulty of defining poetry, would you consider this a poem? So let me read what I have here. I'm calling it Reading in All Directions, and I mean it as guidance to working on this project. Read a poem in all directions. Read a poem forward, backwards, sideways, out. That is, as presented, ordered by the writer. Then once we get to the end, read back to the start. Brecht, the playwright Bertolt Brecht, wanted his actors to play their parts knowing the end and signaling it to the audience, using the formal end as a filter or lens by which to see back through the presentation to the process that set the piece in motion. Read forward and back. We surface little knots of resistance or reference. Follow these back and forth and sideways and out. What does the poem represent? And what does it invite us to think, see, feel, know, reconceive, etc.? Sideways reading moves us around in the poem, but also shows how the poem's outside or context is inside the poem, informing the poem in our reading of it. Readers are outside, but have been invited in. What fabula, what punctum, what signs, what aporia, and so what? What does a reader make of their reading? And here I'm referencing some key concepts in the study of poetry. Some of these show up in Color's book, but the concept of fabula is one that the writer Robert Scholes has written about, the process of fabulation. The concept of punctum is one that the writer Roland Barthes has written about photography, but we can relate it to poetry. And the notion of signs and aporia, those are different ideas that are floating around out there. And so I wanted to offer these as questions to think about. And part of thinking about the question is, what is the question even asking? Which is also something that confronts us when we read the poem. What is the poem asking? What is it saying? What is it asking? What is it asking of us? Reading in all directions opens up the poem and helps the reader a reader, any reader, all readers, to not only see the poem in new ways, but also to see how they read the poem. So you might consider how the who, where, when, what, how, and why questions aid in doing this too. And remember, this is a sheet I handed out at one point. I don't know if it was attached to the syllabus. I believe it's in the old materials in Blackboard. If you can't find it, let me know and I'll locate it and post it. Consider how these questions aid in doing this too. Who speaks? Who speaks to whom? Where and when does the speaker make these utterances that we overhear if they are not addressed to us exactly? What is the speaker speaking about? And what is the poem about that it does not directly say, but we can infer? How is the poem arranged, and with what devices or moves? And why does the speaker speak? This is related somehow to why the writer writes, but the speaker in the poem is not identical to the writer of the poem, however they're related. The colors chapter on poetry, excuse me, as a lot of you have noted, has useful moves, but you can note how I'm drawing on Color's questions for making sense of narrative from his chapter 6. He has a set of questions on focalization. He has a set of questions on presentation. What are the questions here that seem useful to you, and how do they help you to read, present, and represent your chosen poem? So I see now that this is not a poem, but a script for talking. So I hope these questions are useful to you. The goal this week, remember, one of the goals this week is to post something along the lines of what Emily has posted, to offer feedback to a couple of people if you're interested in going the extra mile, to follow up on what's been posted to you last week. Don't leave questions hanging, and you might not want to leave comments hanging either. Think of the work we did last week as kind of setting up what we're doing this week, and it will help us to move forward. Now this will be true also of what I'm asking you to do in the library, and this is a lesser task. The poetry notes is a bigger task. Emily and Krista are right on it, right at the beginning of the week they're posting. Don't let this go too far past Wednesday, right, because you want to make it available to people so that you can be wrapping it up next week. Because next week we're going to be building on what people are finding in the library in order to begin to do some annotation of text and working toward preparing a draft of the final essay in the course. And I'll talk more about that next week. But I've posted a couple places to start. I've also found a very useful link. One of the librarians offers 2 videos on starting research, and they're for my English 105 class, but they're relevant to us. Emily has offered us the process for developing a research question, and she posted a link, and you'll see that I've asked her a question about the link that she's posted because I'm not sure why she's sending us where she's sending us. And then, oh yeah, there's that. I learned how to do this the other day. See if you can best that. All right, so to back out, this week, 2 main tasks, but you also want to follow up here. You may be invited to follow up here as well. And if you look back at last week, right, everybody, I think most everybody has participated in these 2 discussions. Here you indicated what poem you're working on now. Here you indicated what you found useful in color. I've offered you some feedback. I can see from the number of posts that there's a lot of back and forth here, right? But also these numbers tell me that not everybody has posted, not everybody has responded. It's not too late to do that. In fact, I'd encourage you to do that as a way to move forward, okay? Back out at the home page, you'll see we have a number of announcements. I think I posted 3 in the last 2 days. And so check those out. The one marked this week where I'm, again, playing around with what I can do with the keyboard. We're building on what we did last week. And I'm inviting you to look at some things which I've talked about in the video here. And I hope you're feeling all right. Be in touch with me by email if there's something I can do to help you. I hope that you will let me know, and be well. How do I shut this off? I have 30 more seconds. Cheers.